a Hell's Angel noticed a tiny tent on the roadside. Inside was a cute girl with a heartbreaking secret. The meeting had run long, like it always did when Bear started talking about the new bylaws. Tank Morrison sat in the back of the clubhouse, arms crossed over his chest, letting the words wash past him. He'd heard it all before. 23 years in the Iron Cross chapter did that to a man, made the meetings blur together like rain on a windshield. Now he swung his leg over his Harley, the leather seat cold beneath him, even though it was late summer. The sky above the clubhouse parking lot had turned the color of a bruise, purple and gray, and heavy with something that hadn't decided yet if it wanted to be a storm. Tank pulled his gloves on, one finger at a time, the way he always did. Some of the younger guys teased him about it, said he had rituals like an old man. Tank didn't care. 23 years on a bike taught you that the little things mattered. The gloves, the check of the mirrors, the way you listened to the engine before you trusted it to carry you 40 miles down a dark highway. He was 45 years old, and some mornings his knees reminded him of every one of those years. His beard had more silver in it now than brown, though he kept it trimmed close, same as his hair. The tattoos on his forearms had faded some, blues going soft and green with age. He'd earned every one of them. The Iron Cross patch on his back was the only thing about him that still looked exactly the same as it had the day he'd first pinned it on, half a lifetime ago. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. The engine roared to life underneath him, familiar as a heartbeat. He pulled out of the lot and onto the state highway, the wind picking up around him, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't fallen yet. This stretch of road was quiet this time of night. Just farmland on either side, dark fields stretching out toward a horizon he couldn't see anymore. No streetlights out here, just his headlight cutting a small, trembling circle out of the growing dark, and the taillight of nobody, because there wasn't another vehicle for miles. Tank liked the quiet, mostly. He'd tell you that if you asked him. But riding alone at dusk had a way of pulling old thoughts up to the surface, the ones he kept buried during the day when there were bikes to fix and brothers to laugh with. He thought about Denise sometimes, on rides like this, his ex-wife. 11 years married, and it had ended quiet. Not with a fight, but with a long, slow fade, like a radio station losing its signal the farther you drove. No kids. She'd wanted them, back at the start. He'd always found reasons to wait. Now he wondered if some part of him had known, even then, that he wasn't built for that kind of staying. The club was his family now. Had been for a long time. Bear and Diesel and Cutter and all the others back at the clubhouse he'd just left. They'd stood by him through the divorce, through his mother's funeral, through every hard year a man could have. That counted for something. It counted for a lot, actually. But there were nights, riding alone like this one, when Tank felt a hollow place in his chest that all the brotherhood in the world couldn't quite fill. A house with no one waiting up. A refrigerator with just enough food for one. He shook the thought loose, same as always. Rode faster, let the wind do the work of clearing his head. The first drops of rain hit his face just as he came around a long bend in the road, spitting cold against his cheeks and the back of his neck. He squinted, ready to open the throttle and get himself home before the storm really opened up. That was when his headlight caught it. Something small and pale, low to the ground, right at the edge of the shoulder where the grass turned to gravel. A tent, half sunk in on itself, one corner flapping loose in the wind like a broken wing. Tank eased off the gas, frowning beneath his helmet. Way too close to the road. Way too flimsy for weather like this. He slowed the bike to a crawl, staring at the sad little shape shivering in his headlight, and felt something in his gut tell him not to just ride on past. Tank pulled the bike onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under his tires, and killed the engine. The sudden quiet felt strange after so many miles of engine noise, just the wind now, and the soft patter of rain starting to pick up around him. He swung off the bike, slow, joints protesting the way they always did these days, and pulled his helmet off, hanging it on the handlebar. The rain was coming down steadier now, soaking into his shoulders, running in little rivers down the back of his neck. He didn't much mind it. He'd ridden through worse. The tent sat maybe 15 feet off the road, pitched in a shallow ditch that was going to fill up with water if this storm got any worse. One of the poles had snapped or bent, and the whole thing sagged to one side, looking more like a wounded animal than a shelter. Tank figured a drifter, somebody who'd wandered too far from a bus station and settled here because it was as good a spot as any, or maybe a teenager who'd run off after a fight with his folks, the kind of kid who'd be back home in a day or two once he got hungry enough. He walked toward it slow, keeping his boots loud on the gravel so whoever was inside would hear him coming. No sense scaring somebody worse than the storm already had. "Hey!" he called out, keeping his voice easy, the same voice he used on skittish dogs and new prospects at the clubhouse. "Anybody in there?" For a second, nothing. Just the flap of loose nylon snapping in the wind. Then he heard it. A voice, small and cracked, coming from somewhere deep inside that sagging tent. "Go away." It was a girl's voice, young, shaking, though Tank couldn't tell if it was from cold or fear or both. He stopped where he was, maybe 6 feet from the tent, and crouched down so he wasn't looming over it anymore. He was a big man, 6'3", and built like something that hauled freight, and he knew what he looked like to a stranger in the dark. Leather vest, patches, tattoos crawling up both arms. He'd learned a long time ago that showing up smaller, physically, could mean the difference between somebody trusting you and somebody bolting. "I ain't here to hurt you," he said. "Just saw your tent from the road. Looked like it was about to come apart in this storm." Another long silence. Rain kept falling, harder now, drumming against his leather vest and pooling in the brim of his hair. "I'm fine," the voice said, though it didn't sound fine at all. It sounded like somebody holding on by a thread. "Storm's getting worse," Tank said. "Mind if I take a look, just to see if that pole's fixable? Won't come in unless you say so." He heard shuffling inside, fabric against fabric, and then, after what felt like a long time, the voice again. Quieter now. "Fine, but just look." Tank reached out and unzipped the flap a few inches, slow, giving her time to stop him if she wanted. She didn't. What he saw made something in his chest tighten up. A girl couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, sat curled in the corner of the tent, knees pulled up to her chest. She was soaked through, her hair plastered flat against her skull, lips gone pale with cold. Her clothes looked like they'd been dry once, days ago maybe, but now they hung wet and heavy on a frame that looked like it hadn't had a good meal in a while. She had a backpack clutched against her chest, like it was the only solid thing left in her world. Both arms wrapped around it so tight her knuckles had gone white. Her eyes, when they met his, were wide and scared, but there was something else in them too. Exhaustion, the kind that went bone deep, past sleep, into something closer to giving up. "I told you I'm fine," she said again, though her voice cracked right down the middle of the sentence. "Please, just leave me alone." Tank held up both hands, slow, and eased back from the tent flap. "All right," he said. "All right, I'm backing off." He stood, his knees popping in the quiet, and walked back to his bike. From the saddlebag he pulled a protein bar and a bottle of water he'd been saving for himself, and he carried them back, setting them down gentle at the tent's entrance, not pushing them inside, not asking for anything in return. "Gonna leave these here," he said. "You don't gotta eat 'em if you don't want. But they're here." He didn't wait for an answer. He walked back to his bike, swung his leg over, and fired up the engine. As he pulled back onto the highway, rain streaking across his headlight, he couldn't shake the image of her face. Those eyes. That backpack held like a shield against the whole world. Tank didn't sleep much that night. He lay in his bed at the clubhouse, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain hammer against the tin roof. And every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face. Those eyes. That backpack clutched like armor. He told himself it wasn't his business. Told himself plenty of folks fell on hard times and found their own way through it, same as he had once, a long time ago, back when he was younger than that girl and sleeping in places worse than a busted tent. But telling himself that didn't make the feeling go away. It just sat there in his chest, heavy as a stone, until the gray light of morning finally came through his window, and he gave up trying to argue himself out of it. He got up before the sun was all the way over the tree line. In the kitchen, he made 2 ham and cheese sandwiches, wrapping them tight in foil, and filled an old thermos with coffee. Black, the way he figured a person who'd been out in the cold all night might need it. He grabbed an apple from the bowl on the counter, and then, almost as an afterthought, he went out to his garage and dug through a stack of tarps until he found one that wasn't full of holes. Heavy-duty, waterproof, the kind that could actually hold up against a storm instead of falling apart like the sad scrap of nylon she'd been living under. He strapped it all down on the back of his bike and rode out just as the sun was starting to burn through the clouds. The ride felt longer this time, though it was the same stretch of highway. Maybe it was the sandwiches sitting warm against his back, or maybe it was just the not knowing. Would she still be there? Had she packed up in the night and moved on, scared off by a stranger poking around her tent? Or worse, had somebody else found her first, somebody without his intentions? But when he came around the bend and the ditch came into view, the tent was still there. Sagging worse than before, one whole side collapsed from the night's rain, but still there, still holding. He pulled off onto the shoulder same as before, killed the engine, and this time didn't bother calling out right away. He just started unloading, laying the tarp out flat on the ground beside the bike, setting the thermos and the wrapped sandwiches on top of it. "Morning," he said, keeping his voice easy. "Brought you some food. Real food this time, not just a protein bar, and a tarp, since that one you got looks like it's about done for." There was a long pause from inside the tent. Then the zipper came down, slow, and she peered out at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed, like she hadn't slept much either, and her hair was a tangled mess from the wind. But she was looking right at him this time, not away, not down, sizing him up. "You again," she said. Her voice was rough, but there was less shake in it than the night before. "Me again," Tank said. He didn't move closer, just crouched down by the tarp, same as he had the first time, giving her space. "Figured you could use a decent breakfast. No strings on it." She eyed the sandwiches like she didn't quite trust them. Like maybe there was a catch hiding somewhere in the foil wrapping. But her stomach must have won out over her suspicion, because after a moment she crawled forward, just enough to reach the food, and pulled it back into the tent with her. "Thank you," she muttered, not quite meeting his eyes now. "Ain't gotta thank me," Tank said. "Just eat." He watched her unwrap the sandwich with hands that trembled slightly, whether from cold or hunger he couldn't say, and take a bite like she was trying not to seem too eager, though it was clear she was starving. "You got a name?" he asked, keeping his tone light, like it didn't matter much either way. She chewed slow, considering the question, then shook her head. "Don't matter," she said. "I'm not staying here long." "Fair enough," Tank said, not pushing. "Don't gotta tell me nothing you don't want to." He stayed crouched there a while longer, not saying much, just letting her eat in something like peace. When she'd finished the first sandwich and started on the apple, he stood, knees popping again, and nodded toward the tarp still folded on the ground. "That'll hold up better than what you got," he said. "Storm's supposed to come back through tonight." She glanced at the tarp, then back at him, something unreadable passing over her face. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, quiet. Tank shrugged, like it was the simplest thing in the world. "Because somebody didn't do it for me once, and I remember what that felt like." She didn't have an answer for that, just looked at him for a long moment, like she was trying to decide if he was telling the truth. "I'll come back tomorrow," Tank said, walking toward his bike. "Check on you. Make sure that tarp's holding up." He expected her to argue, to tell him not to bother, same as she had the day before. But this time she just watched him go. Silent, the apple still in her hand, and said nothing at all. The days settled into a kind of rhythm neither of them talked about, but both of them counted on. Tank would finish up at the garage around 4, wiping the grease off his hands with a rag that never quite got them clean, and tell his business partner Dale he had somewhere to be. Dale never asked where. He'd just nod and wave him off, and Tank would swing his leg over his bike and ride out to that same bend in the highway, saddlebags loaded with whatever he'd managed to scrounge up that day. The second day, he brought a sleeping bag, a real one, rated for cold weather, not some thin thing that let the chill soak through. She'd looked at it a long moment before taking it, like she was doing the math on what it cost and whether she could ever pay him back. "It's used," Tank told her, which was a lie. He'd bought it new at the outdoor store in town. Still had the tags on it when he pulled it out of the bag, but he figured she'd take it easier if she thought it wasn't a big deal. The third day, he brought canned food, a little propane stove, and a battery lantern, the kind that could run half the night if she needed the light. She'd taken the lantern in both hands like it was something precious, turning it over, studying the switch. "Batteries are already in it," Tank said. "Should last you a while." She'd clicked it on and off once, just to see it work, and something in her face had loosened a little, like the light itself was a kind of promise. By then, she wasn't flinching anymore when he came around the bend. She still watched him careful, still kept her guard up in the way she held her shoulders, but she didn't scramble back into the tent, or eye him like he might turn into something dangerous. She'd sit at the mouth of the tent, tarp keeping the ground dry beneath her, and wait for him to settle into his usual crouch a few feet off. He never got closer than that. Never made a move to sit right next to her. Never reached for her things or tried to look inside the tent uninvited. He kept the same distance every time, like a man measuring out respect in exact feet and inches, and she seemed to notice the way her shoulders came down a little more each visit. On the fourth day, he came with a bag of oranges and a couple of granola bars. Nothing fancy, and lowered himself down onto the tarp, same as always. The evening was cooling off, the sun dropping low and orange over the tree line, throwing long shadows across the ditch. She was quiet for a while, peeling one of the oranges he'd brought, and Tank didn't push, just watched the sky do its thing and let the silence sit easy between them. "Ren," she said suddenly, not looking up from the orange in her hands. Tank glanced over. "What's that?" "My name," she said. "It's Ren." Something in his chest loosened, hearing it, like she'd handed him something fragile and important. "Ren," he repeated, testing the shape of it. "That's a good name." She kept peeling the orange, not saying anything else for a moment, and then, in a voice so quiet he almost missed it under the sound of the wind moving through the grass, she said, "Thank you. For all of it. The food, the tarp, the lantern. Nobody's done anything like that for me in a long time." Her voice cracked on the last part, just barely, like the words had cost her something to say out loud. Tank didn't make a big thing of it, didn't move closer, didn't reach out to pat her shoulder or anything like that. He just nodded, slow, and looked back out at the darkening sky. "You don't gotta thank me," he said. "But you're welcome, all the same." He was quiet a moment, turning something over in his mind, and then he said, "I didn't have much growing up either. My old man wasn't around much, and when he was, it wasn't nothing good. Spent a lot of nights out of the house myself, one way or another. Found the club later on, and they were the first people who ever looked out for me without wanting something back." He didn't look at her while he said it, just kept his eyes on the horizon, giving her the space to take it in or not, however she needed to. A week to the day after he'd found her, Tank rode out to the bend expecting the same routine. Same crouch on the tarp, same quiet talk while the sun went down. But when he pulled up and killed the engine, he heard it before he saw her. Crying. Not loud, not the kind of crying people did for attention, the kind that came out in broken little gasps, like she'd been holding it back so long her body didn't know how to do it any other way anymore. He found her sitting just inside the tent flap, knees pulled up to her chest, face buried in her arms. The lantern was off. The oranges from the day before sat untouched in their bag beside her. Tank didn't say anything at first. He just lowered himself down onto the tarp in his usual spot, same distance as always, and waited. "Wren," he said finally, soft as he could manage with a voice that gravel and years had roughened. "I'm right here." She didn't answer, not with words. Her shoulders shook, and she pressed the heel of her hand against her eyes like she could push the tears back in if she tried hard enough. Tank had seen grown men cry like that in his life. Brothers who'd lost people, men who'd hit rock bottom and didn't know which way was up anymore. It never got easier to watch. "Take your time," he said. "Ain't going nowhere." It took a few minutes. The wind picked up a little, rustling through the grass along the ditch, and somewhere far off a truck rumbled down the highway and faded into nothing. Tank sat with his forearms resting on his knees, patient as stone, and let her cry herself out. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes were red and swollen, her face blotchy in the fading light. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, a gesture that made her look younger than her years, like a kid caught out past dark. "My mom died," she said. 8 months ago." Tank went still. He didn't say anything, didn't want to interrupt whatever this was that had finally cracked open in her. "Cancer," Wren said. "Fast. Faster than anybody thought it'd be. One day she was making dinner, complaining her back hurt, and 4 months later she was gone." Her voice wavered, but she kept going, like now that the dam had broken, the words wouldn't stop coming. "My stepdad, Gerald. He raised me since I was 7. He's not my real dad, but he's the only dad I ever really had. And after Mom died, he just changed." She wrapped her arms tighter around her knees. "He wouldn't let me out of his sight. Wanted to know where I was every second of every day. Checked my phone, read my messages. I had a full ride lined up for college, this program I'd worked for years to get into, and he wouldn't sign the papers. Said it was too far away. Said he needed me close. Said he couldn't lose anybody else." Her jaw tightened. "He took away my friends, too. Said they were a bad influence. Said I didn't need them. Said all I needed was him. I felt like I was drowning in that house. Like I wasn't his daughter anymore, just something he owned. Something he was scared of losing, so he had to keep locked up. She looked up at Tank, eyes glassy and raw. I didn't know what else to do. I packed a bag one night while he was asleep and I just left. I didn't have a plan. I still don't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. Tank felt something hot and tight coil up in his chest. The same old protective fire he'd felt plenty of times before, back when some brother's kid got messed with, or when he saw somebody smaller getting pushed around by somebody bigger. He kept his voice level, though, because he could see she didn't need his anger right now. She needed something steady. "Okay," he said. "Okay, Ren. Thank you for telling me that." He looked at the sagging tent, the thin walls that had barely kept the rain out all week, and something in him settled into a decision that felt like it had been coming for days. "You're not staying out here anymore," he said, firm, no room for argument in his voice. "Not one more night. You're coming with me." Ren didn't argue. That surprised her more than anything, how easily the fight went out of her when Tank said those words. Maybe it was because she was too tired to fight anymore. Maybe it was because some small part of her, the part that hadn't spoken up in months, finally believed somebody meant it when they said they'd help. She packed her backpack with shaking hands while Tank folded up the tarp and the tent, working quiet and efficient in the dark. He didn't rush her. He just waited, same as he always did, until she nodded and said she was ready. The ride to the clubhouse took 20 minutes. Ren sat behind him on the bike, her arms wrapped around his broad middle, the night air cold against her face. She'd never been on a motorcycle before. Under any other circumstances, she might have been scared of the speed, the wind, the rumble of the engine beneath her. Tonight, none of that scared her. She was too empty for fear to have anywhere to land. When Tank slowed the bike and turned into a gravel lot, Ren lifted her head and saw the building for the first time. It was a long, low structure made of cinder block, with a row of motorcycles parked out front like a herd of resting animals. Light spilled out from windows covered in curtains that didn't quite match. Music thumped faintly from inside, mixed with laughter, deep and loud. Tank cut the engine and the sudden quiet felt enormous. "Listen," he said, twisting around to look at her. "My brother's in there, they look rough. Tattoos, leather, some of them got faces like they've been in 100 fights because they have. But every single one of them has got a good heart. You're safe here, safer than you've been in a long time. I promise you that." Ren nodded, but her stomach twisted anyway as she climbed off the bike. Her legs felt wobbly, and not just from the ride. The door swung open before they even reached it, and warm light and noise spilled out onto the gravel. A man built like a refrigerator stood in the doorway, his beard braided with a few silver beads, his arms covered in ink from wrist to shoulder. Behind him, Ren could see more men, big men, loud men, filling the room with their voices and their laughter. Her feet stopped moving on their own. Every instinct in her screamed to turn around, to run back into the dark, where at least she knew what to expect. Tank must have felt her hesitate, because his hand came to rest gentle on her shoulder, steady as a rock. "You're all right," he said quietly. "Just breathe." The refrigerator of a man in the doorway looked down at her, and his whole face changed. The gruffness melted into something soft, something almost fatherly. "Well now," he said, voice booming but not unkind. "Tank, you didn't tell us you were bringing home a guest." "This is Ren," Tank said. "She's going to be staying with us a while." The room went quiet as they stepped inside, a dozen heads turning to look at her. Ren felt her whole body go rigid, felt the old, familiar urge to make herself small, invisible. But then one man, younger than the rest with a shaved head and a scar through his eyebrow, hopped up from the couch. "You hungry?" he asked. "We got chili. Bear made it, so fair warning it might set your mouth on fire, but it's good." Before she could answer, someone else was pressing a blanket into her hands, soft and worn, smelling like fabric softener. Another man cleared a spot on the couch, sweeping aside a pile of motorcycle magazines and an ashtray. "Sit, sit," he said. "You look like you're about to fall over." Wren sat, stiff and unsure, clutching the blanket like a shield. But the men didn't crowd her. They didn't stare. They just went back to their laughing and talking, weaving her into the noise like she'd always been part of it. Someone handed her a bowl of chili. It was, in fact, so spicy it made her eyes water, and the room erupted into laughter when she gasped and grabbed for a glass of water. She found herself laughing too, a small, surprised sound that felt foreign in her throat. By the time the night wore on, she was still laughing, tucked into the corner of the couch with a full stomach and a warm blanket over her knees, surrounded by rough voices and rougher faces that had somehow, against every expectation, made her feel safe. 3 days had passed since that first night, and Wren had started to find a rhythm at the clubhouse. It wasn't much, just small things. She learned which chair was Bear's favorite, and never sat in it. She learned that the young one with the scarred eyebrow was named Diesel, and that he liked to talk about his motorcycle the way other people talked about their kids. She learned that the coffee pot in the kitchen was always half broken, and you had to jiggle the cord just right to get it to turn on. Small things, but they were starting to feel like hers. That morning, she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of that half-broken coffee, sketching in a notebook Tank had given her. She didn't know why she was drawing. She just felt like it, for the first time in a long while. Then the knock came. It wasn't a normal knock. It was fast and hard. 3 bangs, and then 3 more, like someone pounding with the flat of their fist. The kind of knock that made every head in the room turn at once. Tank was closest to the door. He set down the wrench he'd been holding, wiped his hands on a rag, and walked over without any rush in his step. Wren watched him go, her stomach tightening for no reason she could name. He opened the door. A man stood on the other side, and Wren's whole body went cold the moment she saw him. Gerald. He looked nothing like she remembered. His hair was messy, sticking up in places like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were sunken, rimmed red, darting past Tank into the room like he was searching for something, someone. His shirt was wrinkled, buttoned wrong, like he'd thrown it on without looking. His hands were shaking. "Is she here?" Gerald said, his voice cracking. "Please, please, I just need to know if she's here." Tank's frame filled the doorway, blocking most of the view inside. His voice came out low and even, but there was iron under it. "Depends on who you're looking for." "Wren," Gerald said, and just saying her name seemed to break something open in him. "My daughter. Wren. She's 22, brown hair, she's got a backpack, she ran away 3 days ago, and I've been looking everywhere. I've barely slept, I've barely eaten. Please, if she's here, I just need to see her. I need to know she's all right." Behind Tank, the room had gone still. Bear rose from his chair. Diesel set down the magazine he'd been holding. A few of the other men shifted closer, arms crossing, jaws tightening. They'd heard enough about Gerald over the past 3 days to know the name, and none of it had been good. Wren stood frozen in the hallway, half hidden behind the doorframe, close enough to hear every word, but not yet seen. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was it. This was the man who had controlled every part of her life, who had made her feel like a prisoner in her own home. She braced herself for the anger she remembered, the sharp voice, the demands. But that wasn't what she was hearing. Gerald's legs seemed to give out from under him. He didn't lunge forward, didn't shout, didn't demand. Instead, he sank down onto the front step, right there on the gravel, his knees hitting the ground hard enough that Wren winced from across the room. "Please," he said again, and this time the word came out as a sob. "I can't lose her too. I can't, not after her mother. I can't lose her too." His shoulders shook. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, and the sound that came out of him wasn't rage. It was raw, broken grief, the kind that came from somewhere deep and unhealed. The bikers who had braced for a fight stood frozen, unsure what to do with a man crumbling in front of them instead of swinging fists. Wren's hand gripped the doorframe so tight her knuckles turned white. She stared at Gerald, at this stranger who looked nothing like the controlling man she'd run from, and she didn't know what to feel. Anger, fear, something else she couldn't name. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood there in the hallway, frozen, watching the man she'd run from fall apart on the doorstep, and she had no idea what to believe anymore. The next morning came gray and quiet. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, but the sky still hung heavy, like it hadn't decided what to do next. Wren hadn't slept much. She'd stayed up half the night on the clubhouse couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the low murmur of voices from the kitchen where Tank and a few of the brothers had talked in hushed tones about what to do. Nobody had let Gerald inside. He'd spent the night in his car in the parking lot, and somehow that fact alone told Wren more than any of his words had. A controlling man would have pushed his way in. Gerald had just sat there in the dark, waiting. Tank found her on the couch around 7, a cup of coffee in each hand. He held one out to her. "You don't have to do this today," he said. "You don't have to do this ever, if you don't want." "I know," Wren said, though her voice didn't sound sure of much. "But I think you should hear him out, just once. With me there." Tank's voice was steady, the same steady it had been every day since he'd found her tent on the side of the road. "Not because he's earned it, because you deserve to know the truth, whatever it turns out to be." Wren looked down at the coffee, at the little curls of steam rising off it. She thought about the notebook full of diner sketches sitting on the table where she'd left it, about the strange, fragile peace she'd found in this loud, leather-clad house of strangers who somehow felt less like strangers than her own home ever had. "Okay," she said, "but you stay, the whole time." "Wasn't planning on going anywhere." They met in the kitchen 20 minutes later. Bear had cleared out, along with the others, though Wren suspected they weren't far, probably standing just outside the door in case anything went wrong. Gerald sat at the table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee he didn't seem to be drinking. He looked worse in the daylight than he had the night before. Older, smaller somehow, for a man his size. Wren sat across from him. Tank stood by the counter, arms crossed, close enough to be a wall if one was needed. Nobody spoke for a long moment. "Wren," Gerald finally said, and his voice cracked on just her name, like it cost him something to say it. "I don't even know where to start." "Start with why," Wren said. Her voice was flat, guarded. "Why you had to know where I was every minute. Why I couldn't pick my own friends. Why you wouldn't let me go to school like I planned. Start there." Gerald's hands tightened around the mug. He looked down at it like the answer might be written in the coffee. After your mom died, he said slowly, I didn't know how to do any of it. Being a father, being anybody's father, let alone yours. She always knew what to say to you. She always knew when to hold on and when to let go. I never learned that. I just knew how to be scared. Scared of what? Wren asked, though her voice wavered now, the flatness cracking just slightly. Of losing you too, Gerald said, and his eyes filled up fast, spilling over before he could stop them. Every time you left the house, I thought about her, about getting that phone call, and I thought if I just kept you close enough, if I just knew where you were every second, I could stop it from happening again. I know now that's not love. I know that's just fear wearing love's face, but I didn't know that then. I still barely know it now. He wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand, clumsy, ashamed. I never wanted to trap you, he said. I swear to you, Wren, I never wanted that. I just didn't know how to be a father without her telling me how. Wren stared at him, her jaw tight, her eyes wet but unwilling to spill. She wanted to believe him. Some small, tired part of her almost did. But 3 days on the side of a road didn't disappear because of one apology. I'm not coming home, she said quietly. Not yet. Gerald nodded fast, like he'd expected that, like he didn't dare ask for more. Tank spoke up from the counter, his voice calm and final. There's a diner off Route 9, neutral ground. You two start there. Slow, supervised, nobody's rushing anything. Gerald looked at Wren, hope flickering weak and uncertain in his tired eyes. Okay, he whispered. Okay. Whatever you need. The diner sat off Route 9 like it had been there forever, a low building with a faded blue roof and a sign that buzzed more than it lit up. Inside, it smelled like coffee and bacon grease and old vinyl seats. A bell over the door jingled when Tank pushed it open, and he held it for Wren, who walked in with her arms crossed tight over her chest like she was holding herself together. Gerald was already there, sitting in a booth by the window. He stood up too fast when he saw them, like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to hug her or shake her hand or just disappear into the floor. In the end, he did none of those things. He just stood there, awkward, until Tank cleared his throat and nodded toward the booth. I'll be right over there, Tank said, already moving toward a table 1 row back, close enough to hear, far enough to give them room. He sat down heavy in the chair, the wood creaking under him, and picked up a menu he had no intention of reading. His eyes stayed on Wren the whole time, steady as a lighthouse. Wren slid into the booth across from Gerald. A waitress came by, poured 2 cups of coffee without being asked, and left just as quiet as she'd come. Neither of them touched the cups. Thanks for coming, Gerald said. Wasn't for you, Wren said. It was for me. Gerald nodded, like he understood that, like he'd expected it. He wrapped his hands around his coffee mug, the same way he had at the clubhouse table, like the warmth of it was the only steady thing left in his world. How's the diner? Wren said, and let it hang there, empty and stiff, because she didn't know what else to say, and the silence between them felt too big to sit in. It's not my diner, Gerald said quickly. I meant that place. I know you weren't asking that. I don't know what I meant. They sat there a moment longer, the kind of silence that presses down on a person's chest. Wren looked out the window at the gray sky, at the cars passing on the highway, at anything but him. I used to bring your mom here, Gerald said suddenly. Wren's eyes snapped back to him. Before you were born, he went on, his voice softer now, like he was stepping carefully onto ice he wasn't sure would hold. She loved this place, said the coffee was terrible and she didn't care. She used to order the pancakes even in the middle of summer, said breakfast food didn't have a season. Wren's jaw tightened, but something in her chest loosened just slightly, like a knot pulled an inch looser. "She used to sit right where you're sitting," Gerald said. "Same booth. She'd draw on the napkins while we waited for the food. Little houses, little towns. She said someday she wanted to open a shop, sell things she made with her hands. Never did it. Life got busy, but she never stopped drawing on napkins." Wren's throat went tight. She hadn't known that. Nobody had ever told her that. She thought of her own notebook, full of diner sketches, tucked away in her bag back at the clubhouse. And for the first time, she wondered if some things get passed down without anyone meaning to pass them down at all. "I didn't know that," she said quietly. "There's a lot I should have told you," Gerald said. "About her, about me. I got so scared of losing you I forgot to give you her, if that makes sense. I forgot to give you the good parts. I just gave you rules instead." Wren didn't say anything for a long moment. She looked at her coffee, finally picked it up, took a small sip. "Same time next week," she said. "Just coffee, no promises." Gerald's eyes went bright and wet again, but he nodded fast, grateful, like she'd handed him something precious. They stood to leave a few minutes later, the visit short, but no longer unbearable. As Gerald reached for his jacket off the back of the booth, Tank noticed his hands were shaking, a fine, small tremor he tried to hide by shoving them quickly into his pockets. The diner looked the same as before. Same buzzing sign outside, same smell of coffee and bacon grease. Wren picked the same booth without thinking about it, and Gerald slid in across from her like he was afraid the seat might not hold him if he moved too fast. Tank took his spot one table back. He ordered eggs this time, figured he might as well eat something since he was going to be sitting there a while. He kept his eyes down on his plate more than he had the first time, giving them room to breathe. The waitress poured coffee again. This time Wren picked hers up right away. "You said you got scared," Wren said once the waitress had gone. "Last time, you said you got scared and forgot to give me the good parts. What were you scared of exactly?" Gerald turned his mug slowly on the table, watching the coffee ripple. "Everything," he said. "I was scared of everything." He looked up at her, and his eyes were tired in a way that went deeper than not sleeping. "Your mom got sick so fast," he said. "You remember? One day she had a cough, and 6 weeks later she was gone." 6 weeks, Wren. I kept thinking, this can't be real. This can't be how it happens. People get warnings. People get time. And then she was just gone. And it was you and me in that house, and I didn't know how to be a father. Not a real one. I was always just the guy who married your mom. I never thought I'd have to do it alone." His hands were shaking again, the same small tremor Tank had noticed before. Gerald pressed them flat against the table like that might stop it. "I kept thinking something was going to take you too," Gerald said. "Every time you left the house, I thought, what if this is it? What if I never see her again? A car accident, a bad person, anything. I couldn't sleep unless I knew exactly where you were. It wasn't that I didn't trust you, Wren. It was that I didn't trust the world. Not after what it did to her. Not after what it did to us." His voice cracked on the last word, and he had to stop and take a breath. "So I started checking your phone," he said. "Started saying no to things. Told myself it was just until I felt better, until the fear went away. But it never went away. It just got bigger. And I turned into somebody I didn't even recognize. Somebody who made his own daughter run out into the rain, rather than stay in her own house." Wren's eyes were wet now, and she didn't wipe them. "I didn't know any of that," she said, her voice thin. "I just thought you didn't trust me. I thought you looked at me and saw somebody who was going to mess up, somebody you had to control so I wouldn't ruin my life. I never once thought it was because you were scared of losing me. I thought it was because you thought I was going to disappoint you." "No." Gerald said quickly, shaking his head hard. No, Wren, never that. I felt like I couldn't breathe in that house, she said, tears running freely now. Like every door I opened, you were right behind me asking where I was going. I felt like a kid, worse than a kid, like a prisoner. And I didn't understand why, because you never explained it. You just gave me the rules and expected me to follow them without asking anything. I know, Gerald said. I know, and I'm sorry. I should have told you what was happening inside me instead of just building walls around you. I thought if I built enough walls, nothing bad could get in. I never once thought about what it was doing to you being locked inside them. Wren wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at him for a long moment, really looked like she was seeing something new. I get it now, she said quietly. I don't know if I trust you again yet, but I get it. That's enough for me, Gerald said. That's more than I deserve right now. Across the room, Tank set his fork down, slow and quiet, watching the two of them sit there in their fragile, unfinished peace. He thought about grief, how it could dress itself up as anger, as control, as 100 other ugly things, when really it was just love that didn't know where to put itself. He felt something loosen in his own chest, watching Gerald's shaking hands finally still against the table. Tank waited until the check was paid before he made his move. He wiped his mouth with a napkin, stood up, and walked over to their booth like he'd been planning it the whole meal. Gerald, he said, come by the clubhouse tonight. Nothing formal. Just food, some of the guys. Maybe a game on the TV. Wren knows the place. Figured you should see where she's been staying. Gerald blinked up at him, surprised. The clubhouse? It's not what you think, Tank said. No trouble. Just want you to see it. See her there. See that she's safe. Wren looked between the two men, something unreadable crossing her face. Then she nodded slow. You should come, she said to Gerald. It's not scary, I promise. Gerald showed up at 7, wearing a collared shirt like he was going to church instead of a biker clubhouse. He stood in the gravel lot for a full minute before he worked up the nerve to walk up to the door, and Tank noticed, watching from the window, how his hand trembled on the frame of his car before he let go of it. Inside, the place was loud. Big Mike had the TV turned up on some baseball game, and Dozer was arguing with Cutter about whether the ribs needed more sauce. When Gerald stepped through the door, the noise dropped a notch, like somebody had turned down a dial. A dozen heads turned toward him. Tattooed arms, leather vests. A room full of men who looked like they could bend steel with their hands. This is Gerald, Tank said, clapping a hand on the man's shoulder. Wren's stepdad. There was a pause. Gerald stood there, stiff, like he expected somebody to throw a punch. Big Mike was the one who broke it. He walked over, wiped his hand on his jeans, and stuck it out. You eat ribs? He asked. Yes, Gerald said. Good. Sit down. Cutter thinks sauce fixes everything. It does. But don't tell him I said that. The tension didn't vanish all at once. It melted, slow, like ice on a warm day. Gerald sat at the edge of the long table, quiet at first, answering questions with short, careful sentences. But the bikers kept pulling him in. Dozer asked what he did for work, and when Gerald said he'd fixed cars for 20 years at a shop 2 towns over, something shifted. Dozer grinned wide. You know anything about carburetors on an old panhead? He asked. More than you'd think, Gerald said, and for the first time that night, something like a real smile touched his face. By the time the food was gone and the paper plates were stacked in the trash, Gerald was leaned back in his chair, telling a story about a customer who tried to fix his own transmission with duct tape. The room laughed, big and loud, and Gerald laughed too, surprised by the sound of his own voice joining in. Tank watched Wren from across the room. She sat on the arm of the old couch, a soda in her hand, watching her stepfather laugh with a room full of men who used to scare her. Something in her face had softened. Tank could see it, the guardedness easing out of her shoulders bit by bit. Later, when the crowd thinned and the TV had been turned down, Gerald stood to leave. He thanked Tank, shook hands with Big Mike and Dozer, and then he turned to Wren, who had walked him toward the door. "Thank you for letting me come," he said. His voice was quiet now, just for her. Wren looked at him for a long moment. Then, without a word, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Gerald froze for half a second, like he couldn't believe it was happening. Then his arms came up around her, and he held on, his eyes squeezing shut, his shoulders shaking just slightly. Nobody in the room moved. Big Mike wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand and pretended it was nothing. Dozer looked hard at the ceiling. Tank felt his own throat tighten as he watched the two of them stand there in the doorway, holding on like neither one wanted to be the first to let go. It was the first real hug they'd shared since the funeral. A week passed, and life had found a strange new rhythm. Wren spent her mornings at the clubhouse and her afternoons with Gerald, sitting in his kitchen, teaching him how to make coffee the way her mother used to. The visits were still careful, still a little tender at the edges, like a bone that had broken and was learning to hold weight again. But they were happening. That was the thing that mattered. On a warm Thursday evening, Tank found Wren sitting on the back steps of the clubhouse, watching the sun sink behind the tree line. She had her backpack beside her, the same one she'd clutched like a lifeline the night he found her tent. He sat down next to her, the old wood step creaking under his weight. "You're quiet tonight," he said. Wren didn't answer right away. She reached into the backpack and pulled out a spiral notebook, its cover soft and curled from being carried too long, its edges gray with wear. She held it in her lap for a moment like she was deciding something. "I never showed anyone this," she said. "Not even my mom knew all of it." Tank said nothing. He'd learned that with Wren, silence was an invitation, not a wall. She opened the notebook and handed it to him. The first page had a drawing of a small building, simple lines, a peaked roof, a porch with 2 rocking chairs out front. Underneath it, in neat handwriting, were the words, "Wren's Diner." Tank turned the page. More sketches. A counter with red stools, a pie case, a window looking out over a long stretch of highway that looked achingly familiar. "Is this—" Tank started. "The spot where you found me," Wren said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I used to sit out there sometimes, before everything happened with Gerald. There's this bend in the road, right past the old gas station, where truckers pull over to stretch their legs. I always thought somebody should build something there. Somewhere warm, somewhere people could stop and feel like they mattered for a minute." Tank kept turning pages. There were menus, written out in careful detail. Eggs and bacon for $2 less than the diner in town. Pie by the slice. Coffee that never ran out. There were notes on suppliers, on paint colors, on how many booths would fit if the building was built a certain way. Then he found a page of numbers, columns of them, dates going back over a year. Babysitting, waitressing shifts, dog walking. Every entry added up small amounts that together became something much bigger. "You've been saving this whole time?" Tank asked, looking up at her. Wren nodded, her eyes glassy but her jaw set, the way it got when she talked about something she cared about. "Since before Mom died. I never told anyone because it felt stupid. A runaway kid with a notebook full of pie recipes and a dream she can't afford." "It's not stupid," Tank said, his voice rough. "It felt impossible," Wren said, "especially after everything. but I never stopped thinking about it. Even in the tent, when things were as bad as they've ever been, I used to pull this out and just look at it. It was the only thing that felt like mine. Tank looked down at the notebook again, at the careful lines, the years of hope pressed into paper. He thought about the night he'd found her, soaked and scared, holding onto her backpack like it was the last solid thing in the world. He hadn't known then that inside it was a whole future, folded up small, waiting for somebody to believe in it. He closed the notebook gently and handed it back to her, but he didn't let go right away. "Wren," he said, "the club's gonna build you that diner." She looked up at him, startled. "Tank, I didn't show you this so you'd—" "I know why you showed me," he said, "but I'm telling you anyway. We've got guys who can pour concrete, guys who can wire a building, guys who owe me favors from here to 3 counties over. You've been carrying this alone long enough." Wren's eyes filled, and for once, she didn't try to hide it. The clubhouse meeting room smelled like motor oil and coffee, the same as it always did. Long tables had been pushed together, and every folding chair in the building was filled. Bikers leaned against the walls when they ran out of seats, arms crossed, boots planted wide. Tank stood at the head of the room, Wren's notebook in his hand. "All right, listen up," he said, and the room quieted the way it always did when Tank spoke. 20 years of respect did that. He held up the notebook. "Some of you know the girl who's been staying with us. Wren. Found her in a tent off Route 9 a few weeks back, half drowned and scared to death." A few of the brothers nodded. Everybody knew the story by now. "What you don't know is what she's been carrying this whole time." He opened the notebook and turned it around so the room could see the sketch of the little building with the peaked roof and the 2 rocking chairs on the porch. "She's been saving money since before her mama died. Every dollar she could scrape together, going on 2 years now. She wants to build a diner right where I found her, a place for truckers, travelers, anybody who needs a warm plate and somebody who won't judge them for showing up broke and tired." Big Sal, a mountain of a man with a beard down to his chest, leaned forward. "You're saying we're building this thing?" "I'm saying I want to," Tank said. "But it's not my call alone. This is a club decision." There was a pause, and then Dozer, who'd been fixing engines since before Tank had his license, spoke up. "I got a cousin who does electrical. He owes me from that thing with his truck." "I can pour a foundation in my sleep," said another brother near the back. "Done it for my brother-in-law's garage last year." Sal grinned. "I know a guy who pulls permits fast if you ask nice, or if you don't." Laughter rippled through the room, and just like that, the decision seemed to make itself. Hands went up. Voices piled on top of each other, offering trucks, tools, weekends, favors owed by men 3 counties over. Tank felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been tight since the night he'd found that little tent sagging in the rain. That was when the door creaked open, and Gerald stepped inside. He looked out of place, the way he always did around the club, a man in a collared shirt standing among leather vests and tattoos. But he didn't flinch under the stairs. He walked straight up to Tank, hands shoved in his pockets like he was working up his nerve. "I want to help," Gerald said. "Whatever this costs, I've got money set aside, from Linda's life insurance. I never touched it because I didn't know what it was for." His voice cracked, just slightly. "I think I know now." The room went quiet again, but it wasn't the same quiet as before. It was softer. Tank studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "All right, Gerald. You're in." Nobody argued. A few of the brothers even clapped him on the back, the way they did with each other, and Gerald's shoulders came down an inch, like he'd been waiting his whole life for somebody to do that. 2 weeks later, they broke ground. The roadside lot, once nothing but gravel and weeds, was now marked off with stakes and string, the outline of a building sketched into the dirt where Wren's diner would stand. A dozen bikes were parked along the shoulder, chrome catching the morning sun. Trucks with lumber and tools sat with their tailgates down. Somebody had brought a cooler of sodas, and somebody else had brought a boombox that was playing classic rock too loud for 8 in the morning. Wren stood off to the side, arms wrapped around herself, watching Gerald take his place next to Sal at the far end of the lot. Gerald was holding a shovel he clearly didn't know how to use properly, and Sal was laughing, showing him how to angle it. Tank came to stand beside her. "You ready?" Wren didn't answer at first. She was watching Gerald laugh, really laugh, for the first time in longer than she could remember, while a Hell's Angel the size of a refrigerator patted him on the back like they'd known each other for years. "Yeah," she finally said, her voice thick. "I'm ready." Tank handed her a shovel of her own. Together, the whole strange, mismatched family walked out into the lot, and the first shovel broke ground. The days settled into a rhythm nobody planned but everybody kept. Tank would close up his garage around 6, wash the grease off his hands, and drive straight to the lot. Most nights, Gerald was already there, sleeves rolled up, a thermos of coffee sitting on the tailgate of his sedan, which looked out of place parked next to all the trucks and bikes. He wasn't much of a builder when they started. He held nails wrong. He measured twice and still cut crooked. But he showed up every night, and that counted for more than skill ever could. "You're holding that hammer like it owes you money," Tank said one evening, watching Gerald wrestle with a stud wall. Gerald huffed out a laugh, wiping sweat from his forehead with his forearm. "Linda used to fix things around the house. I paid other people to fix things. I never learned any of this." Tank took the hammer from him, showed him the grip, the swing. "Nobody's born knowing how to build a wall, Gerald. You just gotta keep swinging till it stands up straight." It became a kind of unspoken thing between them, working side by side as the sun dropped low and orange over the tree line. Sometimes they didn't talk much at all, just handed each other nails, held boards steady, grunted when something didn't line up right. Other nights, the talking came easier than either of them expected. "I used to think being a good father meant keeping everybody safe," Gerald said one night, staring at the wall they'd just framed. "Turns out I just kept her caged." Tank didn't say anything right away. He set his hammer down, leaned against a stack of lumber. "I lost my old man young. Different way than you lost Linda, but it left the same kind of hole. Made me think love had to look like control, too. Took me a long time and a lot of miles on a bike to figure out it don't." Gerald looked at him, something grateful and tired in his eyes. "How'd you figure it out?" "Brothers," Tank said simply, nodding toward the lot, where Sal and Dozer were arguing good-naturedly over a crooked door frame. "They never tried to own me, just showed up, every time. That's it. That's the whole secret." Gerald nodded slowly, like he was turning the words over, trying them on for size. He didn't say anything else that night, but the next evening he brought 2 thermoses of coffee instead of 1, and set one down next to Tank without a word. The frame went up faster after that. Walls climbed where there had only been open air. The shape of the building became real, something Wren could stand inside of and see the ceiling where a ceiling would be, the windows where light would pour through every morning. She started coming by every night after her shift at the little grocery store in town, still in her apron sometimes, hair pulled back, sawdust catching in it before the night was through. One evening, Sal showed up with a flat board of raw pine and a can of white paint, setting it down on 2 sawhorses like he was presenting a trophy. "Figured it's time," he said, grinning at Wren. "Every good place needs a name up front." Wren stared at the board for a long moment. Her throat went tight. She dipped the brush slow, careful, like the letters mattered more than anything she'd ever painted before. W-I-R. E, an apostrophe. S, then underneath it, Roadside. When she stepped back, brush still in her hand, paint speckled up her arm, the whole lot went quiet for just a second, and then Sal let out a whoop that could have been heard 3 counties over. The others joined in, hollering and clapping, somebody banging a wrench against a metal beam like a bell. Gerald wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, not even trying to hide it. Tank just stood there, arms crossed, a smile breaking wide across that weathered, bearded face. That night, they built a bonfire in the cleared dirt beside the framed walls. Sparks climbed into the dark sky, and the bikes lined up along the shoulder threw long shadows across the ground. Somebody brought a cooler of sodas and burgers off a portable grill. Gerald sat between Sal and Dozer, laughing at something Tank couldn't quite hear from across the fire. Wren sat close to the flames, knees pulled up, watching the signboard leaning against the unfinished wall, her name glowing orange in the firelight. For the first time in longer than she could remember, surrounded by leather vests and motor oil and a stepfather who was finally, truly trying, Wren felt something settle deep in her chest. It felt whole. It felt like family. The Saturday of the preview gathering came in bright and clear, the kind of morning that made the whole world look freshly washed. Wren had been up since dawn, wiping down countertops that were already clean, straightening menus that didn't need straightening, checking the little bud vases on each table for the 3rd time. "You're going to wear a hole in that counter," Tank said, leaning in the doorway with a toolbox still in his hand. He'd come to fix a wobbly hinge on the front door, though Wren suspected he just wanted an excuse to be there early. "I want it to be right," she said. "Just for today. Just to see it full of people before it's official." Tank set the toolbox down and looked around the space, really looked at it. The counter Wren had picked out herself, a deep honeywood that Dozer sanded smooth over 3 nights. The booths along the window, upholstered in cherry-red vinyl that Sal's cousin got wholesale. The chalkboard menu above the register, still blank, waiting for Wren's careful handwriting. Sunlight poured through the big front windows, catching the dust motes floating lazy in the air. "It already is right," Tank said quietly. By early afternoon, the little diner was filling up. Sal came first, of course, dragging Dozer and the 2 other brothers with him, all of them cleaned up as much as bikers ever cleaned up, which meant fresh shirts and combed beards. Then came a trickle of townsfolk, people from the grocery store where Wren used to work, a few neighbors from Gerald's Street, the mailman who'd gotten curious about all the construction. Word had spread the way it does in small towns, quiet and fast, and by 2 o'clock the diner buzzed with voices and laughter, plates of sample food passing hand to hand. Gerald stood near the counter, and it took Wren a second to place what looked different about him. Then she realized. His color was back. His cheeks weren't gray anymore, weren't drawn tight with the worry that had lived there for months. He laughed at something Dozer said, threw his head back, and the sound of it, easy and full, made Wren's chest ache in the best way. "You look happy," she told him, sliding a plate of fries in front of him at the counter. "I am happy," Gerald said. "Happier than I've been in a long time, Wren. I mean that." She squeezed his shoulder and moved on, weaving between tables, refilling water glasses, soaking in every bit of it. The diner smelled like coffee and fried onions and fresh paint, and underneath all of it, something like hope. Around 3, Tank climbed up on a chair, which creaked loud under his weight, and clinked a fork against his glass of soda. The room quieted, faces turning toward him, some grinning already because they knew Tank wasn't a man for speeches. "I ain't good at this," he started, and a few people laughed. He cleared his throat, looked down at Wren, at Gerald, at the brothers scattered through the crowd. "Bunch of us, we used to think family meant blood, meant the people stuck with you whether they liked you or not. Took me a long time to figure out that ain't always true." He paused, scratching at his beard. "Sometimes family's a girl in a busted tent on the side of the road. Sometimes it's a man who don't know one end of a hammer from the other, but shows up every night anyway." Gerald ducked his head, smiling. "Family don't always look the way you expect. Sometimes it's a bunch of ugly bikers and a diner that smells like fried onions. But it's family all the same." He raised his glass. "To Wren's Roadside." The room erupted, glasses clinking, somebody whooping loud enough to rattle the windows, Sal pounding the table with his fist. Wren felt tears sting her eyes, and she didn't fight them, just let them fall as she looked around at every face crowded into the little diner that used to be nothing but an empty patch of dirt off the highway. Gerald reached over and took her hand, squeezing it tight, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, the future didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something to look forward to. The phone rang at 3 a.m, loud and sharp in the dark of Tank's bedroom. He was awake before the second ring, some instinct built from years of late-night calls telling him this wasn't good news. "Yeah," he said, voice thick with sleep. "Tank." It was Dozer, and something in his voice made Tank sit straight up in bed. "Storm came through bad, real bad. I drove past the diner to check on it like you asked, and man, the roof's caved in on the east side. Whole stack of lumber we had covered is soaked through, probably ruined. Glass broke out of 2 windows, too." Tank was already pulling on his jeans, phone wedged between his shoulder and his ear. "How bad we talking?" "Bad enough you should come see for yourself. I already called Sal. We're gonna need everybody." Tank hung up and sat for a second on the edge of his bed, hearing the wind still howling outside, rattling the shutters. Rain hammered against the window in sheets. He thought of all those nights the brothers spent hammering and sanding and painting, all that work, and something twisted hard in his gut. But mostly he thought of Wren, standing in that diner just 2 nights ago with tears of joy on her face. He called her next. She picked up on the first ring, like she'd been waiting for something, though she couldn't have known what. "Tank, it's the middle of the night. What's wrong?" "Storm hit the diner hard," he said, keeping his voice steady even though his chest felt tight. "Roof's damaged. I'm heading over now." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Wren's voice, small and scared. "I'm coming." "Wren, it's pouring rain and it's dark. Wait till—" "I'm coming, Tank!" The line went dead. By the time Tank pulled his truck up outside what was left of Wren's Roadside, the sky had gone that strange gray color that comes right before dawn. Rain still falling, but softer now. More like a drizzle than the storm's earlier fury. His headlights swept across the wreckage, and his stomach dropped. Part of the roof had folded in on itself like a crushed soda can. Boards that had been carefully measured and cut lay scattered and split across the muddy ground. The stack of lumber Dozer had covered was soaked black, warped beyond saving. Wren's car pulled in right behind him, and she was out the door before it even stopped rolling, running through the mud in her pajama pants and rain jacket, staring up at the broken roof with her hands pressed over her mouth. "Oh no," she whispered. "Oh no, no, no." Gerald's truck rolled in minutes later, headlights cutting through the drizzle. He climbed out fast, faster than Tank had seen him move in weeks, already pulling on work gloves. "Gerald, it's not even light out yet," Tank said, stepping toward him. "You don't need to be out here right now." "Like hell I don't." Gerald's jaw was set tight, his eyes fixed on the collapsed roof, on Wren standing frozen in the mud, staring up at her ruined dream. "That's my daughter's diner. I'm not standing on the sidelines." Tank wanted to argue, wanted to remind him about his heart, about the doctor's warnings, but the look on Gerald's face stopped him. This wasn't a man who'd back down. So Tank just nodded and handed him a pair of gloves from his truck. The brothers arrived one by one as the sun crept up over the horizon, painting the wreckage in a soft, sad light. They set to work hauling broken boards, clearing debris, assessing what could be salvaged and what was lost for good. Wren moved through it all like a ghost, picking up pieces of the chalkboard menu she'd painted so carefully, now cracked in half. Gerald worked alongside Dozer, hauling a heavy section of splintered roof beam toward the growing pile of ruined lumber. His face was red with effort, sweat mixing with the light rain still falling. "Gerald, let me get that end," Tank called out, jogging over. But Gerald didn't answer. He stopped mid-step, the beam slipping from his hands and thudding into the mud. His hand flew to his chest, fingers clawing at his shirt, and his knees buckled beneath him. "Gerald!" Tank lunged forward, catching him before he hit the ground hard, easing him down instead. Wren's head snapped up at the sound of Tank's voice. She saw Gerald on the ground, gasping, his face twisted in pain, and the chalkboard piece fell from her hands, shattering in the mud. "Dad!" she screamed, sprinting across the wreckage. "Dad!" The ambulance doors slammed shut, sealing out the gray morning light and the sound of the brothers shouting instructions to each other in the mud. Inside, it was too bright, too clean, too quiet except for the beeping of the machine they'd hooked Gerald up to the second they lifted him onto the stretcher. Wren gripped his hand so hard her knuckles had gone white. "Dad, stay with me, okay? Stay with me." Gerald's eyes fluttered, his face gray and slick with sweat. "Wren," his voice came out cracked, barely a whisper. "The diner." "Don't talk. Please don't talk." Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the rain still clinging to her hair. The paramedic, a young woman with tight braids and steady hands, worked fast, sliding a mask over Gerald's face, checking the monitor, calling numbers back to someone up front. "Blood pressure's dropping. We need to move." Tank sat pressed against the wall of the ambulance, out of the way but close enough that his knee brushed Wren's. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that would help right now. He just kept his hand on her shoulder, steady and firm, an anchor in the storm of sirens and shouting. The ride to the hospital felt like it lasted both a second and a lifetime. By the time they burst through the emergency room doors, a team of nurses and doctors were already waiting, moving Gerald onto a gurney and wheeling him back through double doors that swung shut with a heavy final sound. "You can't come back here," a nurse told Wren gently, stepping into her path. "We need you to wait. Someone will come talk to you as soon as we know more." Wren stood frozen, staring at the doors that had just swallowed her stepfather, her chest heaving. Tank guided her by the shoulders toward a row of plastic chairs bolted to the wall, easing her down into one before her legs gave out entirely. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Wren sat with her knees pulled up to her chest, rocking slightly, her rain jacket still dripping onto the floor tiles. Tank sat beside her, silent, his big hands folded together, elbows on his knees. A doctor finally came through the doors, an older man with tired eyes and a clipboard pressed against his chest. "Family of Gerald Hutchins?" Wren shot up so fast she nearly knocked her chair backward. "That's me. I'm his daughter." The doctor's face was carefully neutral, the kind of calm that doctors learn to wear like armor. Your father has a serious heart condition. Looking at his history, this has been building for a long time. Coronary artery disease, significantly worsened by prolonged stress and physical strain. Has he been under unusual pressure lately? Overexerting himself? Ren's mouth went dry. We've been building a diner. He worked construction most days, even when I told him to rest. The doctor nodded slowly, like this confirmed something he already suspected. His medical records show he was warned about this months ago. Blood pressure, cholesterol, the early signs were all there. It looks like he chose not to follow up on treatment. He never told me, Ren whispered. He never said anything. We've stabilized him for now, the doctor continued. But I won't sugarcoat it. The next 24 hours are critical. We need to watch for any further strain on the heart. If he stays stable through the night, that's a good sign. But right now, it could go either way. The doctor excused himself, disappearing back through the double doors, leaving Ren standing in the middle of the waiting room like she'd been hollowed out. She sank back into the chair, her whole body trembling. "This is my fault," she said, barely audible. "I did this. I wanted the diner so bad, I didn't care that he was pushing himself too hard. I saw him tired every night, and I let him keep going because I wanted my dream so bad." "Ren." Tank's voice was low, firm. She shook her head, tears spilling freely now. "If he dies, it's because of me. I already lost my mom. I can't lose him too, not because of some stupid diner." Tank reached over and took her hand, holding it steady in both of his. "You didn't do this. You hear me? Gerald made his own choices. He hid this from everybody, including his own doctor. That's on him, not you." Ren pulled her knees back up to her chest, burying her face against them, and Tank stayed right where he was, his hand never leaving hers. The hours crawled by like they had nowhere to be. The hospital waiting room emptied out as the night wore on. Other families collected their loved ones or got their own bad news and drifted away, until it was just Ren and Tank under the buzzing fluorescent lights, the vending machine humming in the corner, the smell of coffee and bleach hanging in the air. Ren hadn't moved from her chair in almost 2 hours. She stared at a spot on the floor like it might give her answers if she looked hard enough. "I should never have told him about the diner," she said suddenly, her voice flat and hollow. "I should have kept that notebook shoved in the bottom of my bag where it belonged." Tank turned his head toward her. "Ren." "No, listen." She finally looked up, her eyes red and raw. "It was just a dream. A stupid dream I had when I was sitting in that tent with nothing else to think about. It didn't need to become real. I could have kept sketching it in a notebook forever and never hurt anybody." "You didn't hurt anybody. He's in there right now because he was out in the rain nailing boards to a wall for me." Her voice cracked. "Because he wanted to make my dream happen so bad he didn't tell anyone his heart was falling apart. That's not a coincidence, Tank. That's cause and effect." Tank leaned back in the plastic chair, which groaned under his weight, and rubbed a hand over his face. He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words the way a man chooses his footing on ice. "You know how many funerals I've been to for brothers in the club?" he said finally. Ren blinked at him, thrown off. "Too many," Tank said. "Guys who rode too fast, guys who drank too much, guys whose hearts just gave out from all the miles they put on themselves, same as Gerald. And every single time, there's somebody left behind asking the same question you're asking right now, wondering what they could have done different, wondering if it was their fault somehow. Maybe it is sometimes. Maybe," Tank allowed. "But mostly, no. Mostly people just love hard and live hard, and sometimes their bodies don't hold up under the weight of it. That's not on the people they loved. That's just being human." Ren wiped her face with the back of her sleeve. I still feel like I did this. I know you do. Grief lies to you like that. It tells you it's your fault so you got something to hold on to. Because the alternative, that some things just happen and you can't control them, that's scarier than anything. Tank's voice was low and steady. The same voice he used to calm spooked animals and panicked new recruits. But Ren, listen to me. If Gerald wakes up tomorrow and hears you gave up on that diner because you're scared of loving something too much, that'll break his heart worse than any blocked artery ever could. Ren's chin trembled. That man spent the last 2 months of his life building something with his own 2 hands, because he wanted to give you back the thing you lost the day your mom died. He wanted you to have somewhere that was yours. You think he'd want you to bury that in the mud because he got scared and his body gave out? I don't know what he'd want, Ren whispered. I do, Tank said. I've known enough good men to know what they want for the people they love. They want them to keep going. They want them to build something, not freeze up and stop living because they're afraid of losing more. That's not honoring him. That's just letting fear win twice. Ren didn't answer. She just sat there, letting his words settle over her like a blanket too heavy to push off. But somehow the weight felt different than the guilt had. Steadier, truer. The clock on the waiting room wall ticked past 4 in the morning. Outside the windows, the black sky had started to soften at the edges, the first gray hints of dawn creeping in over the parking lot. Ren's eyes grew heavy despite herself, the exhaustion of the day finally catching up to her, dragging her under. Her head drifted sideways, coming to rest against Tank's broad shoulder, and within minutes, her breathing evened out into the slow rhythm of sleep. Tank sat perfectly still, careful not to disturb her, his eyes fixed on the double doors at the end of the hallway, keeping watch as the sun began to rise. Morning came in gray and soft, the kind of light that made the hospital hallway look even more tired than it already was. A nurse came by around 7 and told them Gerald was stable. Weak, but stable. His heart had taken a hit, but he was fighting. Ren went in to sit with him. Tank stayed outside the door for a minute, watching through the little window as she pulled a chair close to the bed and took Gerald's hand in both of hers. Gerald's eyes were closed, his face pale against the white pillow, but his chest rose and fell steady and even. That was enough for now. Tank stepped back from the door and pulled out his phone. He walked down the hallway toward the elevators, out of earshot, and dialed Bear first. Bear had been with the club longer than almost anyone, a mountain of a man with a beard down to his chest and hands like shovels, but soft as anything when it came to people he cared about. Yeah, Bear answered, voice thick with sleep. It's Tank. Gerald's stable. He's gonna be okay. Thank God, Bear said, and Tank heard him let out a breath. Listen, I need you to get everybody together. Everybody who can swing a hammer, everybody who owes me a favor, everybody who's got a truck. We're going back out to the diner. There was a pause. Tank. The storm tore that place apart. You saw it, same as I did. I know what I saw, Tank said. And I know Gerald about killed himself trying to build that roof back up for Ren. I'm not gonna let a thunderstorm be the reason that dream dies in the mud. We're gonna fix it. Today, tonight if we have to. Another pause, shorter this time. You want Ren to know? No, Tank said. Not yet. She's got enough on her plate sitting with Gerald right now. Let her have that. We'll handle this ourselves. When Gerald's ready to come home, I want that diner standing there like nothing ever happened to it. Consider it done, Bear said, and Tank could already hear him moving, could hear the creak of a door and keys jingling in the background. I'll call Diesel and Preacher. We'll get the lumberyard opened up if we gotta bang on old Pete's door to do it. Do it, Tank said. I'll meet you all out there in an hour. He hung up and stood there a moment, looking back down the hallway at the door to Gerald's room, at the small shape of Ren's shoulders through the glass. Then he turned and walked out into the parking lot where his bike was waiting. And he rode. By the time he got to the diner site, the wreckage looked worse in daylight than it had in the storm. Half the frame had buckled, boards scattered across the mud like broken bones, the tarps that had covered the unfinished walls shredded and flapping uselessly in the breeze. It looked like something that had given up. But by the time Bear's truck rolled in 20 minutes later, followed by Diesel's flatbed loaded with fresh lumber, and then Preacher, and then 4 more bikes rumbling up the gravel road, the wreckage started to look like something else. It started to look like a job. They worked through the morning without stopping, hauling away broken boards, sorting what could be saved from what couldn't. Diesel ran the saw, cutting new beams to match the ones that had splintered. Bear and 2 other brothers hoisted the frame back into place, grunting and cursing and laughing between breaths, the kind of rough camaraderie that got hard things done. Preacher, who used to do roofing before he joined the club, took charge of the crew rebuilding the trusses, barking directions like a general. By afternoon, sweat soaked through every shirt, and hands were blistered and raw, but nobody stopped. Word got around, and more brothers showed up. Then a few of the townsfolk, too. Folks who'd heard the story of the girl on the roadside and her stepfather in the hospital. Folks who wanted to be part of something good. As the sun dipped low and the sky turned orange, then purple, then black, someone dragged out the generator and set up floodlights around the site, and the work kept going. Under the harsh white glow, the new roof beams went up one by one, hammers ringing out into the night, sweat and sawdust and exhaustion etched into every face. But nobody quit. Nobody even thought about it. Gerald opened his eyes slowly, the way a man does when his body isn't quite sure it wants to wake up yet. The room was quiet, except for the soft beep of the monitor beside him and the hum of the air vent overhead. For a moment he just lay there, blinking at the ceiling tiles, letting his mind catch up to where he was. Then he turned his head, and he saw her. Wren was curled up in the chair beside his bed, her knees pulled up to her chest, her head tipped against the wall at an angle that looked like it couldn't possibly be comfortable. She was still wearing the same flannel shirt and jeans from 2 nights ago, the one stained with mud from the storm. Her hair had come loose from its braid and fell messy across her face. She looked exhausted even in sleep, like her body had finally given out from holding everything together for too long. Gerald felt something tighten in his chest that had nothing to do with his heart. He didn't want to wake her, but his hand moved on its own, reaching out slowly until his fingers brushed against hers, where they rested on the edge of the mattress. Wren stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused for a second, and then she sat up straight so fast the chair scraped against the floor. "Gerald?" Her voice cracked. "You're awake. You're actually awake." "I'm here," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he meant it to, worn down from 2 days of silence. "I'm okay, Wren." She grabbed his hand with both of hers, the same way she had the first day, and this time tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. "I thought I lost you. I thought I did this to you." "No." Gerald squeezed her hand as hard as his weak grip would let him. "No, you didn't do this. Look at me." She lifted her eyes to his, red-rimmed and scared. "I need to say something," Gerald said, "and I need you to let me get through it because I don't know if I'll have the nerve to say it twice." Wren nodded, wiping her face with the back of her sleeve. "When your mother died," Gerald began, "I felt like the floor disappeared from under me. One day I had a wife and a daughter and a life that made sense, and the next day I had you. Just you, and I was terrified I was going to fail you the way I felt like I failed her by not saving her. So I held on too tight. I made rules. I watched everything you did. I told myself it was protection, but it wasn't. It was fear, my fear, and I put it on you like it was your job to carry it." "Gerald," Wren whispered. "Let me finish," he said gently. I turned you into a prisoner in your own life because I couldn't stand the thought of losing you too. And instead of holding you close, I pushed you so far away you ended up alone in a tent on the side of a highway. That's on me. All of it. I am so sorry, Ren. I am sorrier than I know how to say." Ren's shoulders shook as she cried, but she didn't let go of his hand. "I was so angry at you," she said, "for so long. I thought you didn't trust me, that you didn't see me as a real person, just something to control." "I know," Gerald said, "and I understand if it takes time to believe I've changed. But I need you to know, from the bottom of whatever's left of this old heart of mine, I love you like you're my own. You always have been. I just forgot how to show it right." Ren leaned forward and rested her head against his shoulder, careful of the wires and tubes still connected to him. "I forgive you," she whispered. "I do. I don't want to be angry anymore. I just want us to be okay." "We're going to be okay," Gerald said, wrapping his arm around her as best he could. "I promise you that." They stayed like that for a long moment, the monitor beeping steady in the background, the morning light growing brighter through the window. Then the door creaked open, and Tank stepped in, his big frame filling the doorway. He had a look on his face, something warm and a little sly, like a man holding on to a secret he was dying to share. "Doctor says you're getting discharged tomorrow," Tank said, crossing his arms and leaning against the doorframe. "Figured you two would want to know?" Ren lifted her head, wiping her eyes. "That's wonderful." Tank's smile widened just slightly. "Yeah," he said. "Wonderful's about right." The next afternoon, the hospital room felt different. Sunlight poured through the blinds in warm stripes across the floor, and Gerald sat on the edge of the bed already dressed in the clean clothes Ren had brought him, his hands folded in his lap like a kid waiting for recess. The doctor, a short woman with kind eyes and a clipboard she barely glanced at anymore, went over the same instructions one more time. Rest. No heavy lifting. No stress, no matter how tempting it might be to ignore that last part. She said his heart had given him a scare, but it was strong, and with time and care, he would make a full recovery. "You hear that?" Ren said, nudging his shoulder. "Full recovery, no excuses now." Gerald managed a tired smile. "I heard her the first 3 times, Ren. I'm just making sure it sticks." The nurse helped him into a wheelchair for the trip out, which Gerald grumbled about the entire way down the hallway, insisting he could walk just fine. Nobody listened to him, which seemed to be becoming a pattern he was slowly learning to accept. When the automatic doors slid open at the entrance, Tank was already there, parked right at the curb in his pickup truck instead of his motorcycle, the engine idling low. He hopped out when he saw them, moving around to open the passenger door like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Figured the bike wasn't the best idea today," Tank said, nodding toward Gerald. "Wouldn't want y'all falling off the back trying to hang on." "I appreciate the concern," Gerald said dryly, easing himself into the truck with Ren's help, "though I think my dignity took a bigger hit than my heart did back there." Ren laughed for the first time in what felt like days, climbing into the back seat behind him. "Dignity's overrated. Alive is better." Tank shut the door, walked around, and slid into the driver's seat. He didn't start driving right away. Instead, he glanced in the rearview mirror at Ren, then over at Gerald, like he was checking that everyone was settled before he committed to something. "You good?" he asked Gerald. "Good as I'm gonna get," Gerald said. "All right then." Tank threw the truck into drive and pulled out onto the road. For the first few minutes, Ren didn't think anything of it. She sat back, watching the town blur past the window, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. Gerald was alive. He was talking, he was breathing, he was going to be okay. That was enough to fill up all the space in her chest for a while. But then the buildings started to thin out. The shops and gas stations gave way to open fields, fences, the long stretch of highway she knew better than she wanted to. Wren sat up straighter. "Tank, this isn't the way to Gerald's house." Tank kept his eyes on the road, one hand loose on the wheel, the corner of his mouth twitching like he was fighting back a grin. "Nope." "Then where are we going?" "You'll see." Wren narrowed her eyes at the back of his head. "Tank." "Patience," he said. "Never was your strong suit, was it?" Gerald, who had been quiet, turned slightly in his seat despite the doctor's orders about strain, looking between the two of them with a curious tilt to his brow. "Does somebody want to explain what's going on?" "Nope," Tank said again, and this time he did grin, wide and unashamed. Wren pressed her face closer to the window as the truck rounded a bend she recognized instantly, the same stretch of highway shoulder where she had once pitched a sagging, soaked tent in the dark, where a stranger on a motorcycle had stopped and changed everything. Her stomach flipped. Her breath caught somewhere in her throat. "Tank," she said quietly, "why are we out here?" He didn't answer. He just slowed the truck as they came around the final curve, the tires crunching softly against gravel. And then Wren saw it. She gasped, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. The diner stood exactly where it was supposed to be, whole and gleaming in the afternoon light, strings of fairy lights wrapped along the eaves and glowing softly even in the daylight. A crowd of people stood gathered out front, leather vests and familiar faces mixed in with strangers from town, all of them turning toward the truck as it rolled to a stop. Wren's hand stayed pressed against her mouth as she pushed the truck door open and stepped out onto the gravel. Her legs felt shaky, like they belonged to someone else. The crowd let out a cheer the moment she appeared. Bikers she recognized whooped and clapped, their big hands slamming together loud enough to echo off the fields. Big Mike, who once told her he'd never trusted anyone under 300 pounds, was holding a cake with both hands like it was made of gold. Sully had somehow found a banner and was holding one end, while a woman Wren didn't recognize held the other. The paper stretched crooked between them, reading "Welcome Home" in bright red letters. There were faces she'd never seen too. An older woman in a flowered dress stood near the door, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. A young couple held a toddler on their hip, the baby waving a small flag someone must have printed just that morning. A man in a mechanic's jumpsuit leaned against his truck, arms crossed, grinning like he already knew the whole story. "Word travels fast around here," Tank said, coming around to help Gerald out of the truck. "Guess folks like a good comeback story." Wren didn't trust her voice yet, so she just nodded, her eyes moving over the building itself. The diner stood tall and proud, its windows clean and gleaming, the new paint on the walls a soft, warm yellow that reminded her of sunrise. It didn't look like a disaster had ever touched it. It looked like it had always been meant to stand exactly there, exactly like this. "They worked through the night," Tank said quietly, coming to stand beside her while two of the brothers helped Gerald into his wheelchair. "Soon as you two left for the hospital, we started hauling lumber. Didn't stop till it was done." "You didn't tell me," Wren whispered. "Wanted it to be a surprise." Tank shrugged, like it was nothing, like he hadn't spent an entire sleepless night hammering boards under the rain-soaked sky just to give her this. "Figured you'd earned one good surprise after everything." Wren's eyes stung. She blinked hard, trying to keep the tears from spilling over in front of everyone. But it didn't work. One slipped free and rolled down her cheek, and she didn't bother wiping it away. The crowd parted a little as she walked toward the door, Gerald's wheelchair rolling along beside her, pushed gently by Sully. Someone had hung a small easel near the entrance, a cloth draped over something square and flat, resting on top of it. "Go on," Tank said, nodding toward it. "That's yours to do?" Wren stepped forward, her fingers trembling as she reached for the edge of the cloth. She glanced back once, at Gerald sitting in his wheelchair with his hands folded tightly like he was holding his own heart together, at Tank standing solid and steady like he always did, at the sea of faces waiting behind them, all of them smiling, all of them there for her. She pulled the cloth away. Underneath was a small wooden plaque, carved simple and clean, the letters painted in careful gold. "In memory of my mother, who taught me to dream, even when the road was dark. And to the family that found me on the side of the road." Wren pressed her hand over her mouth again, a small sob breaking loose despite her best efforts to hold it in. Behind her, she heard Gerald's breath catch, heard the soft rustle of him reaching for a tissue someone passed him from the crowd. "It's beautiful, Wren," he said, his voice thick. She turned to him, kneeling down beside his wheelchair so she could look him in the eye. "You're part of this too, you know, all of it. This whole place wouldn't exist without you." Gerald's eyes filled again, and he reached out to squeeze her hand, his grip weaker than it used to be, but no less full of feeling. "Then let an old man be the first customer," he said. "I hear the coffee here is supposed to be the best in 3 counties. Wren laughed through her tears, standing and helping wheel him inside as the crowd cheered again, following close behind. She guided him to the counter, where one of the brothers had already set down a steaming mug, the smell of fresh coffee curling up into the warm morning air. Gerald settled into the seat, wrapping both hands around the mug like he was holding something sacred, and took the very first sip. The following Saturday, the diner opened its doors to the public for the first time. Wren stood behind the counter in a crisp new apron, the fabric still stiff with the smell of fresh cotton. Her hands shook a little as she tied the strings behind her back, checking her reflection in the shiny surface of the napkin dispenser one more time. Her hair was pulled back. Her cheeks were flushed pink. She looked nervous and excited all at once, like a kid on the first day of school. "You're gonna do great," Big Mike said, leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee already in his hand, even though the doors hadn't officially opened yet. "Best coffee in 3 counties, remember?" "That's a lot of pressure for someone who's never worked a real shift in her life," Wren muttered, glancing at the clock. 5 more minutes. "You'll be fine, sweetheart," Tank said from his spot near the door, arms crossed over his broad chest. He'd worn a clean shirt for the occasion, which everyone had teased him about mercilessly. "Just smile and pour the coffee. Rest takes care of itself." At exactly 9 o'clock, Wren flipped the sign on the door from closed to open, and within minutes, the little bell above the door started ringing like it might never stop. Truckers came in first, drawn by the smell of bacon and eggs drifting out into the parking lot. Then came the locals, folks from town who'd heard the story, passing through gossip like wildfire, curious to see the girl who'd built a diner out of a roadside tent and a broken heart. A few bikers from a neighboring chapter rolled in around 10, their engines rumbling loud enough to rattle the windows, but they settled down quick enough once they smelled the cinnamon rolls Sully had baked fresh that morning. Gerald, against every single instruction his doctor had given him, insisted on helping seat guests near the door. He'd traded his wheelchair for a cane now, moving slow but steady, guiding families and strangers alike to open booths with a menu tucked under his arm. "Gerald, sit down," Wren called from behind the counter, balancing 3 plates up her arm like she'd been doing it for years instead of days. "You're supposed to be resting." "I am resting," Gerald said, easing an elderly couple into a booth by the window. "This is very restful," Watching people eat pancakes is basically a form of meditation. That man is going to give himself another heart attack just to prove a point, Tank muttered from his stool at the counter, shaking his head but smiling anyway. Let him, Big Mike said, sliding a plate of eggs toward a trucker who'd just walked in still smelling of diesel and highway dust. Man's earned the right to be stubborn. By noon, the diner was full. Every booth held a family or a group of friends. Plates piled high with eggs and pancakes and thick slices of bacon. Laughter rolled through the space, mixing with the clatter of forks against plates and the hiss of the griddle behind the counter. A group of truckers argued good-naturedly about football in one corner. A young mother wiped syrup off her toddler's chin in another. Somewhere near the back, two of the Iron Cross brothers were teaching a table of teenagers how to properly stack a stack of pancakes, which led to more laughing than actual instruction. Wren moved through it all like she'd been born to it, refilling coffee cups, calling out orders to the kitchen, stopping every so often to catch her breath and just look around at what she'd built. Her cheeks stayed flushed the whole morning, not from nerves anymore, but from something warmer. Something like pride. Tank stayed on his stool at the end of the counter, the same spot he'd claimed the very first day the diner opened, like it had always belonged to him and always would. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. He just watched her work, watched her laugh with customers, watched her wipe down the counter with the same careful hands that used to clutch a backpack like a lifeline on the side of a lonely highway. He thought about that night in the rain, the sagging tent, the terrified girl who wouldn't look him in the eye. He thought about how close he'd come to riding right past her. He sipped his coffee, feeling something settle deep and warm in his chest, something he hadn't let himself feel in a long, long time. Months later, the evening air had that soft gold feeling that comes right before dark, when the sky turns the color of honey and the whole world seems to slow down a little. Tank rode down the familiar stretch of highway, his headlight cutting through the dusk, past the same spot where a sagging little tent had once stood in the pouring rain. There was nothing there now but a strip of grass and a wooden marker the club had put up months ago. Small and simple, easy to miss if you didn't know what it meant. Tank always looked at it anyway. Every single time. He pulled into the gravel lot of the diner just as the sun dipped low behind the tree line, throwing long shadows across the parking lot. The sign out front glowed warm and steady, the letters spelling out Wren's place in soft yellow light, moths already circling lazy loops around the bulbs. He cut the engine and sat there a moment, listening to the quiet click and tick of the bike cooling down, same as he did every evening now. It had become a ritual he didn't think much about anymore. It just was. Through the window he could see Wren moving between the booths, flipping chairs up onto tables, wiping down the counter with the same careful hands she'd always had, though they didn't shake anymore. Her hair was down tonight, loose around her shoulders, and she was humming something under her breath, some tune Tank didn't recognize but liked anyway. He pushed through the door, the bell above it giving its familiar little ring, and the smell of coffee and something sweet, maybe cinnamon, wrapped around him like a blanket. "We're closed," Wren called out without even turning around, a teasing lilt in her voice. "Good thing I'm not just anybody, then," Tank said, settling onto his stool at the end of the counter. Wren turned and smiled, the kind of smile that reached all the way up into her eyes. "Long day?" "Aren't they all?" Tank said, though there wasn't any real complaint in it. Just the tired satisfaction of a man who'd spent his hours doing honest work and was glad to be sitting still. Near the back booth, Gerald sat hunched over a stack of papers, a pair of reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, a calculator and a pile of receipts spread out in front of him. He looked healthier than Tank had seen him in a long while. Color back in his cheeks, some weight filled back onto his frame. The cane leaned against the booth beside him, mostly for show these days. "How are the books looking?" Tank called over. Gerald glanced up, pulling his glasses down slightly so he could look over the top of them. "Better than I expected. Turns out people really will drive 40 minutes out of their way for good pie." "Told you," Wren said, already pulling down a mug from the shelf behind her, the same chipped blue one Tank always used, the one nobody else was allowed to touch anymore. "You did tell me," Gerald admitted, going back to his numbers with a small, satisfied shake of his head. "You told me a lot of things I didn't want to hear back then. Turns out you were right about most of them." Wren poured the coffee, steam curling up into the air, and set the mug down in front of Tank with the same careful motion she used every night. "One coffee, just how you like it." "You didn't even ask," Tank said, though he was smiling. "Don't need to anymore," Wren said, leaning against the counter across from him. "Some things you just know." For a moment, none of them said anything. The diner sat quiet around them, chairs stacked, lights low. The day's noise and laughter settled into the walls like it belonged there now. Outside, the sign glowed steady against the darkening sky, the only light for miles along that stretch of empty highway, same as it had been every night since the day it first opened. Tank wrapped his hands around the warm mug and looked between the two of them. Gerald bent over his papers, Wren leaning tired and happy against the counter she'd built with her own 2 hands, out of a dream nobody thought would ever come true. "Look at us," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Wren looked up and out the window, past her own reflection, past the glow of the sign, toward the dark road where it had all begun. "I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day."